and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, high-stakes talks between senior delegations from Ukraine and the United States aimed at ending Russia's three-year-long war in Ukraine are held in Saudi Arabia in the port city of Jeddah. Well, ahead of those talks, Kyiv conducts its largest drone attack on Moscow since the war began. The Russian army says it intercepted 337 drones across the country. Polls are open and people across Greenland are casting their ballots in a closely watched election which could boost US influence over the mineral-rich island, while President Donald Trump has pledged to take control of Greenland. And after a sharp fall in US stocks in Monday trading, some are asking, is the US economy headed for a recession? Well, amongst the stocks feeling the heat, Tesla. Coming up in just a moment, we will ask the CEO of one of the most quintessentially classic car companies, the Morgan Motor Company, to reveal his company's electric ambitions. Hello and welcome to the programme. Ukrainian and US officials have today been holding crunch talks in Saudi Arabia to try to find a path towards ending the war with Russia. Well, those talks got underway just a matter of hours after Kyiv's forces launched their largest drone attack on Moscow to date. Well, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he hopes the meeting in Jeddah will mend fences with Washington. This after last month's clash with President Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Well, yesterday, President Zelensky suggested Kyiv would be proposing an aerial and naval ceasefire with Russia at those talks in Jeddah. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Al Arabiya's Washington bureau chief, Nadia Bilbassy-Charters, who's following the talks for us in Jeddah. Nadia, great to have you with us. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said his expectations for the meeting was good. I mean, what's the mood like? Is it one of optimism?
It's pretty positive, actually. Just a while ago, I spoke with one of the Ukrainian spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he described the talks as very constructive. He said that what we have seen in the Oval Office, this tension between President Zelensky and President Trump, is water over the bridge now. We're talking about it's being repaired, as he said, and we're moving forward. As you know, Rubio has told us on the plane on our way to Jeddah that basically he wanted to see some kind of a ceasefire achieved. The negotiation in terms of details, whether we're talking about territories or peacekeeping forces or Ukraine joining NATO, all these issues will be discussed later. Of course, there is, as you know, a Russian demand that Ukraine should never be part of NATO, but there is other things too. But he also said that even the signing of the mineral deals with the Ukrainians is not really a top priority for this conference. What's important now is for the Ukrainians to agree into some kind of framework that they can say, take it to the Russians, as we know that the president's envoy, Steve Witkoff, will go to Moscow and he will meet with President Putin. And my understanding is he will take whatever achieved here in Jeddah and he will propose it to the Russians.
Okay, so a temporary truce could be an outcome from this, and a framework could be developed and presented to the Russians. Another big part of this, Nadia, was repairing relations between the United States and Ukraine after that unexpected scene in the Oval Office a couple of weeks ago. Has that now happened, do you think?
I believe so. I mean, this is really what the Ukrainian has been talking about and giving us indication that what happened before is now in the past, and we're talking about a new stage and a new era. Actually, Andrei Yermak, who is the President Zelensky advisor, said to us a while ago that nobody needs this war to end than the Ukrainians. And therefore, they are concentrating on the efforts of how they can meet the American demands. Now, the word demands, maybe it's a strong word, because I asked him, what did you hear from the Americans? Anything basically resembled to the demands. And he said, no, I won't use this word, but I will say that basically We are talking about constructive dialogue. We're listening to each other. And I think the atmosphere has been described as very, very positive. But don't forget, this is Secretary Rubio. He is the head of the diplomacy in the United States, and he's been very nuanced when it comes to talking about these issues, unlike President Trump, who is very bombastic and he used threatening language that obviously not very diplomatic. So from that point of view, I think what they hope to achieve today is some kind of, as you said, a framework that they can go forward and build on these negotiations. And today is not the end of it. Today is the beginning of this long road to end this war. And the U.S. delegation is saying that basically the only person who can do that is President Trump, because he can talk to both sides.
Nadia, in our headlines, we were talking about the Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia last night, some of the biggest since the war began. And I was just wondering how you think that might have impacted the tone and the mood of those talks in Jeddah.
One of the questions we asked is precisely that. And the Ukrainians dismiss it, saying basically it did not come up in the conversation. And the U.S. and the Ukrainian delegation is focusing on a bigger picture. Every day is going to be an attack, and every day is going to be a counterattack. And therefore, this is why the important issue for the U.S. delegation is really finding this framework to end this war. Because as long as we have these attacks continuing, is more soldiers are being killed, and the blood has to stop, as the U.S. will say, and President Trump actually has been saying that hundreds of thousands of troops have been killed, and therefore we need to think of an end to this conflict, and there is no military solution for it. The only way forward is negotiation. And they said they have to be prepared, both the Ukrainians and the Russians, to give concessions. Without concessions, we cannot really talk about ending this war. And there is no end through military means. And as you know, the U.S. has stopped military aid to Ukraine, and the previous administration has been extremely supportive. And without the U.S. help, whether it's militarily or even diplomatically in the UN and other places, the Ukrainians are in a very, very weak position.
Yeah, one of the other things the United States has done is to cut off intelligence sharing with Ukraine. We got some indications from President Trump himself that that was only a temporary measure. I mean, might one of the outcomes of these talks be a full reinstatement of that intelligence sharing arrangement, do you think?
Yes. When they started this meeting, the Ukrainians were hoping that at the end of the day, which is, I think they can conclude the meeting very soon, if it's not concluded already, because we're going to have a briefing shortly with Waltz and Rubio to tell us more about it. I believe that the hope was that they will resume the intelligence sharing. But saying that, Secretary Rubio told us, I asked him specifically about this point on the plane, and he said that they have not cut off all intelligence sharing, and the Ukrainians has enough, in his words, to ward off Russian attacks. So they believe that it was what they did maybe was not vital for the military operation, and there is some kind of cooperation. But the military assistance in general, as you know, is not a popular topic in the U.S., especially among Republicans in Congress. Even if the White House decided to cut it by themselves, I think eventually the Congress will vote, especially among the Republicans in the House, that they will cut off all this aid. And President Trump wanted to negotiate this rare mineral deal in order basically to compensate for what he said, $350 billion that the U.S. gave to Ukraine for no return. And the war is continuing, and our money is wasted, and we have to bring all this money back to the U.S.
Just looking forward to sort of what happens next in the process. I mean, after these talks are over, there are still going to be three sticking points, aren't there, between the Ukrainians and the Russians? Three really important ones anyway. One about territory, one is about peacekeepers in Ukraine, and the other is about NATO membership. Has Russia shown any signs that it might be willing to compromise on any of those three issues, Nadia?
Well, look, I think the U.S. has been adopting this position long before, and even during the Biden administration, that Ukraine will not be part of NATO. And that's understood by the Ukrainians as well. So from that point of view, I think the Ukrainians are prepared to accept this result. In terms of peacekeeping, the Americans, and Rubio actually praised in particular the French and the British position, and he said the American support deploying European forces as peacekeeper in Ukraine. Now the Russians are opposing that, but the Americans somehow dismissing it as it's not a big deal because we really haven't negotiated yet. We just wanted to stop the war by a partial ceasefire with some kind of cessation of hostility, and then we can talk about the other issues. And the third one is the most difficult, which is the territories. And I think there is some kind of truth, accepted truth, that Crimea will be still part of Russia, regardless that it was occupied by the Russians. But I think Ukraine will not get it back. They will negotiate on something else, but they have to know the border, and this is what Secretary Rubio told us. Once we establish the border, then it's very easy, the parameters, it's very easy to negotiate on everything else around it.
Okay, those talks, of course, happening in Jeddah, and Saudi Arabia has been the scene of really major and important diplomatic exchanges the last couple of weeks on this particular issue. Moving forwards, just wondering what role you see, this is my last question, for Saudi Arabia in this whole process.
It's a very important role. Rubio himself again said that very, very few countries in the world that play in this role. I mean, in a way, you can say that Saudis now are replacing Switzerland on neutral ground, where conflicts from different parts of the world, where both parties will go and negotiate in confidence and in secrecy. The Saudis emerged in the region as that player because they have very good relations with both the Ukrainians and the Russians. Last night, we have seen the warm embrace by the Crown Prince to President Zelensky on his official visit here, and equally has very good relations with the Russians. And both, I think, the Russians and the Ukrainians trust the Saudis, that they don't have an alternative motives in terms of undermining these talks. So I believe that we have the first round, obviously, when Sergei Lavrov met with Secretary Rubio and the American delegations here 2 weeks ago in Riyadh. And now today we have the same team, minus Witkoff, talking to the Ukrainians. And I think we will have another round of talks. Could be in Washington. We don't know yet where is the place.
Okay, well, that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you very much indeed, Nadia Bilbassy-Charters, Al Arabiya's Washington Bureau Chief. Thanks again. Well, the US has been saying it expects substantial progress during those ceasefire talks with Ukraine in Jeddah. Well, one of the hot topics expected to come out of this meeting is that of intelligence sharing. Well, while pressure mounts to seal a ceasefire deal, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said he did not expect to sit in a room in Jeddah with the Ukrainians, quote, drawing lines on a map towards a final deal. Well, let's get more analysis. We can speak now to Colonel Brendan Kearney, who is a military affairs analyst and former chief of staff for US Marine Corps forces in Europe. He joins us from California. Colonel Kearney, great to have you with us. Are you optimistic those talks in Jeddah are going to yield some results?
Good to be with you, Tom. I am optimistic. I think the very early reporting that's coming out of those meetings is that the Ukrainians seem to be pleased, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, giving a thumbs up. So those are always pretty good indicators early on. But we'll just have to wait and see until it's over with and we get a readout.
Yeah, Marco Rubio said he was going to listen to Ukraine. I was just wondering, what do you think he's going to be listening out for?
Well, again, this is a new administration. And even though Marco Rubio had a distinguished career as a senator, I think for him to suddenly be placed in this role, he's only 6-7 weeks into it. The most important thing I think any interlocutor can do in these type of situations is listen. Hear what the Ukrainians have to say, and then base your further actions, your statements on what they're saying. Listening is a lost art, so I'm pleased to hear him saying that.
Yeah, I mean, the US delegation has made various concessions, it would appear, on behalf of Ukraine. We haven't had too many concessions from the other side, have we?
No, we have not, and that's not unusual with dealing with the Russians. They are not the best uh, country to deal with when it comes down to diplomatic negotiations. There's some real tendencies towards forgetting things, previous promises, and making statements that just bear little reality. So it'll be interesting to watch this as we get closer to it as to what the Russians really mean when they talk about wanting some type of ceasefire, some type of peace.
And what do you think Ukraine was trying to achieve with that massive barrage of drone strikes on Russian territory last night? I mean, the biggest since the war began. I mean, what sort of a position and what sort of strategy are you seeing the Ukrainians setting up for themselves there?
Well, I think, again, we have to remember that over the last couple of weeks, the Ukrainians have been at the receiving end of some pretty massive rocket, intercontinental missiles, drone strikes from Russia that have killed a number of Ukrainians and done a great deal of damage. So I think what the Ukrainians are doing is sending a message not only to Russia and the world, but also to the United States that they are going to defend themselves. And, we have to admire them for doing that. They're not going to get punched in the face on a repeated basis without punching back. So I think that's the message they're sending. Don't trifle with this because we will continue to defend ourselves.
The Europeans say they want a just and lasting peace. I mean, do you see the European vision as being at odds with the vision of this new administration in Washington?
I think a little bit. And again, I relate this to the education process that the new administration is going through. I respect the Europeans. They have a long, very long history with Russia. And they hold Russia at arm's length because they don't trust them. And I believe their approach is a little bit more realistic than what Washington, D.C. is taking. But again, I'm hoping that as Washington gets more experience with dealing with the Russians, that they will realize that these are people that you have to be very, very careful with in terms of listening to what their negotiation positions are and to what it is they are actually proposing. Because if there's a way to twist the words down the road, and back out of commitments. The Russians have honed that to a fine science over the years. But hopefully we'll get peace out of this. But we're just going to have to wait and see.
Indeed, that's everyone's hope. And obviously, not much compromise, as we've been saying, from the Russian side yet on these key issues like territory, NATO membership for Ukraine, European peacekeepers on the ground in Ukraine. I'm just wondering whether you think, knowing the Russians as you do, whether you think these sort of maximalist demands by the Russians are part of a strategy, a tactic ahead of some hard negotiations.
Oh, yes, I agree with you, Tom. The Russians are masterful in their diplomatic negotiations. They have oftentimes clearly come out ahead of negotiations with the United States. Especially when we had weak administrations. That's not the case right now. And even though Donald Trump appears to be more pro-Russian than pro-Ukraine, I do think that he's a pragmatic man. And what he doesn't want to do is be labeled as a failure. And if we let things happen to Ukraine that the world will criticize us for, that's failure. And I just don't see him doing that. So we're going to have to be very careful with our negotiating team and what is accomplished with Russia and with Ukraine and Europe. There's quite a few players in this game.
Yeah, just lastly, I mean, what do you think the United States is going to do in the event that a deal cannot be struck with the Russians? What's their sort of plan B?
Oh, I think plan B is that we go back to just clearly supporting the Ukrainian efforts and hoping that maybe some other approach from Europe or Russia coming to some type of awareness will go ahead and then become plan A, plan B to plan A. But I think the U.S. will completely back Ukraine if it turns out Russia is being insincere or just not being realistic in their approach with these negotiations.
OK, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thanks for your analysis. Colonel Brendan Kearney, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, let's get some more analysis and we can speak to Boris Volodarsky, former captain in Russia's special forces, the GRU Spetsnaz, who joins us now from Vienna. Captain Volodarsky, great to have you with us again. That Ukrainian delegation is today meeting with America's top diplomat in Jeddah and a large American delegation. How would you advise Ukraine to approach those talks in Saudi Arabia? And what sort of a tone do you think they should try and strike with the US delegation?
Of course, every one of us understands, and the Ukrainian delegation and the Ukrainian president especially, they understand very, very well that cooperation and mutual cooperation with the American side is extremely important for the Ukrainians, especially at this moment of the war. At the same time, the Ukrainian delegation realizes very well that they are being the American side is demanding concessions from one side, while they do not ask the Russian side, which is the aggressor, for any concessions, which sounds a little bit strange. Another thing which the American side is pressing is to sign the minerals agreement, which again can be viewed cautiously from several sides. But in any way, I believe the Ukrainian delegation came to Saudi Arabia with a desire and intention to improve relations with the American side as much as possible, in spite of the events that we know happened on the 28th of February.
OK, I'm going to pick up on the main points you mentioned. I'll come back to the minerals deal. But let's just talk about, recent tensions between Washington and Kyiv. We heard from President Trump just a couple of days ago saying, quote, "I'm finding it more difficult, frankly, to deal with Ukraine." I just wondered why you think it is that he's finding it harder to deal with Kyiv than he is with Moscow. Do you think it's something personal?
First of all, it seems like he has animosity, personal animosity. He and Vice President Vance have personal animosity towards President Zelensky. And of course, we know about the events of the previous term of President Trump. This is one thing. Another thing is that there is a quite obvious collision between President Trump and Russia and President Putin. And so in this view, he is, of course, very much interested to get as much as possible from Ukraine, asking for nothing, no concessions, no steps forward from Russia. And it seems like he is intended to press as much possible on Ukraine to reach his goal, that is to stop the war without any benefits for the Ukrainian side and promising no security to the Ukrainian side.
You say offering no security to the Ukrainian side, but the whole point of the minerals deal that we were talking about earlier, and we've put this question to analysts before on this channel, the minerals deal does include security guarantees, because by having US interests represented all over Ukraine, essentially, Ukraine is under the US umbrella, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's not at all, because President Trump is considering his signature on an agreement or on what he calls a deal as a guarantee for the Ukrainian side, which of course is not the case. Even in the involvement and multi-billion involvement of American companies in the Ukrainian industry is not any guarantee at all. I do not even mention that all professionals say that the minerals amount in Ukraine is not a mineable resource, and to start any profitable mining or possible profitable mining in Ukraine, one needs a multi-billion investment, and that might probably start in a period of about 10 to 15 years, which is, of course, not interested to any American company. So this deal, minerals deal, seems not the principal point, actually. But even if we remember the agreement of 1994, where there was an international agreement signed by several countries like Britain, France, the United States, and Russia, and no one observed any points that were in this agreement, and there was no guarantee at all when Russia wanted its aggression against Ukraine. So what kind of guarantee this minerals deal can give to Ukraine? What kind of serious guarantee it can give? None at all.
OK, it sounds like you're not convinced by the minerals deal. The US Secretary of State, the top diplomat in the Trump administration, says his delegation wants to listen to Ukraine. That, he says, is the objective of this phase of the process there in Jeddah. What do you think he wants to hear?
He wants to hear that the Ukrainian side is eager to sign unconditional surrender to the Russian side. That's what he really wants to hear. He does not want to hear that they agree to limitations, that they agree to stop fighting, stop firing in the sea, in the sea and in the air, and other proposals. What the Ukraine is definitely ready to present. What they want actually, they want Putin's decision, Putin's point of view on this, and Putin wants unconditional surrender and nothing else. They want exactly what they demanded. The NATO, that Ukraine does not join NATO, that Ukraine doesn't have an army, that Ukraine doesn't want the European Union, that the NATO moves back to the positions of 97, and all that sort of things that we all know about.
OK, just lastly, Captain Volodarsky, what's the United States' next move if it emerges from these talks and from subsequent phases in the process that there simply isn't a deal to be made between Ukraine and Russia? What does America do next?
Well, there are several possibilities. One possibility is that President Trump forgets this story and says he's not interested in that anymore. That, for example, he is much more interested to double or even triple the tariffs on Canada, and he's more interested in the Mexico deals. That because Ukraine doesn't want to negotiate, the deal is not interesting for him anymore. Then Marco Rubio might consider himself also in the situation where he might probably decide to retire rather than to continue in the situation that goes on today with Elon Musk and others. Well, there are various possibilities, and we cannot definitely predict what is going to happen if we have this outcome as you described.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Really great speaking to you, as always. Captain Boris Volodarsky, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
In other news, voting is now underway in Greenland. Well, this is an election which will determine the shape of the 31-seat local parliament. And that will give a clearer idea of whether this mineral-rich island is likely to opt for independence. Well, a break from Denmark isn't on the ballot, but it is on everybody's mind. Well, on a number of occasions, the US President Donald Trump has expressed his intention to take control of this strategic Arctic island, which is home to 56 or 57,000 people. Well, polls close tonight at 2200 Greenwich Mean Time, but results won't be known for a couple of weeks. Well, the issue of independence has, as I've been saying, been a prominent feature throughout these last few weeks and throughout the election campaign. But Greenland's representative in the Danish parliament claims that these elections have been influenced by external forces.
We've seen it many times over the election period here in Greenland that there's been influence from the outside. We've been seeing people, handing out dollars, and I think it's important to say that the election here shouldn't be something that other countries are affecting. It should be something that is completely up to us as Greenlanders.
OK, well, let's get some more analysis. We can speak now to Kuno Fencker, who is a Greenlandic MP who joins us from the capital, Nuuk. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. As we've been saying, independence isn't actually on the ballot. So what are the results of this election going to tell us, do you think?
Well, if the people choose Nadia and other independence parties, it will be about independence and the sovereignty of Greenland. We know that independence is a utopia to think of, but we just want to own our own country and have sovereignty of our country. So if people choose us, and if we can form a government that wants to activate our possibility to have a sovereign state and that we can start the negotiations, it will be a vote for independence, if you can say that.
Okay, now the population of Greenland is variously reported as being 56 or 57,000. Perhaps you can correct me on that one. But I was wondering, is there a general consensus amongst the population on this issue of autonomy?
Yes, it's been on the ballot for 46 years, and we had the possibility to become a sovereign state for 16 years. So it's been on the ballot for every election. And we want to put a stop for that, and we need to activate it and be willing to work on our independence. And then the people in the end will choose if the negotiated agreement with the government of Denmark or any other country, if Denmark wants to secede from Greenland. That is what the threat is. They are threatening us by leaving Greenland militarily and also not giving us any subsidies anymore. So if Denmark wants to secede from Greenland, the problem is that other countries, other powerful countries, will become interested in Greenland, and that is what's happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, just for the benefit of our viewers, Greenland was a colony of Denmark, and as you alluded to 46 or so years ago, in 1979, Greenland gained self-rule. I mean, what is the feeling in Greenland towards the people of Denmark? How do people feel about Denmark?
I think that the feeling is fine, but Denmark has done a lot of atrocities against Greenlanders. But we are absolutely willing to say that, let's dig up all the dirt and have a truth and reconciliation agreement so that we can move forward instead of looking back and all kinds of dirt is being digged up from the past. So we just want to own our own country, which was annexed by Denmark in 1953. So Greenlanders want their own country and we want to be sovereign, but we are absolutely willing to and know that we have to work with other sovereign states. Okay, so
if Greenland had to choose between Denmark or the United States, in terms of which country would have sovereignty over Greenland, which one would it choose?
Other countries shouldn't have direct sovereignty of Greenland. We will take the full sovereignty of Greenland, and we will be able to give out some of the sovereignty in regards to defense and security if that is necessary. Our rule clearly states that we should start the negotiations with Denmark and that Denmark should adhere to our right to external self-determination, which is sovereignty, and that we should come to a fair agreement with Denmark. That could be in a Commonwealth system or a free association. The only main thing Greenland, which is non-negotiable for Greenland, is that we want to have sovereignty of our country, and that also is against any other sovereign state. But we clearly know that the United States is present in Greenland in the Bidufik space base, and Denmark has a defense agreement from 1951, which they made without the consent of Greenlanders. So, of course, if we become a sovereign state, we will need to have a bilateral agreement with the United States about the defense and security of the North American continent.
Okay, well, we're out of time. I'd love to talk to you for longer, but thank you very much for speaking to us. Kuno Fencker, Greenlandic MP.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Now, after one of the worst single-day sell-offs in Tesla's history, President Donald Trump is throwing his support behind his advisor, the billionaire Elon Musk, vowing to buy one of his cars. Well, Tesla has been struck this year by competition from rival electric vehicles, particularly those from China. Well, Tesla shares have plummeted 45% during the course of 2025, and on Monday they tumbled more than 15%. This is the lowest rate since October of last year. Well, Tesla might be one of the first names you think of when you think of an electric car company. But with changes in laws surrounding emissions in most countries, a lot of car companies are having to roll out fully electric or hybrid models now. And by the way, that includes some of the classic car manufacturers like the Morgan Motor Company, now in the fourth generation of family stewardship. Well, Morgan began building cars In the year 1909, well, at their headquarters in the United Kingdom, they're working on an experimental prototype, the XP1, which will blaze the trail for future models, many of which could be electric. Well, let's find out more now. We can speak to Matthew Hole, the Managing Director of the Morgan Motor Company, who joins us from Worcestershire in the UK. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I mean, it sounds like Morgan is managing to keep up with the times and remain true to your roots at the same time. Of course, Morgan, very much the antithesis of the mass-produced car. How many cars actually come off the production line every year?
So this year we'll do about 650 cars, and they will go out to markets across the world.
OK, is that number going up?
It is going up, yeah. So yeah, we anticipate next year it'll be closer to 850.
Well, that's a sizable percentage increase. Who is the typical Morgan customer?
Oh, it's a question I get asked quite a lot. It's a really difficult one to answer. There's not really so much as a typical Morgan customer. It's a really, really broad church. But I think what you can distill is everybody loves cars, they love motoring, and they love to be unique. And so buying a Morgan is a very unique experience. Every car is tailored specifically to the customer, and they're all built to order individually. So it's very much a unique experience buying a Morgan, and people respect the craftsmanship that goes into these cars because they're incredibly hand built. There's more hand hours, hand manual skills that go into building a Morgan than any other car.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it. If only 2 are coming off the production line on average every day of the week. What are your main markets?
So at the moment, our key markets have been the UK and Europe historically, but over the last year, we've been really charging across the Middle East. So we've been on sale now in Dubai for about 18 months. At the end of last year, so October time, we launched again in the United States of America. So that's been a really big growth market for us, and the demand has been extremely high over there.
What sort of a reception are you getting in the Middle East here?
Great. I mean, people love the cars. They love the fact that they're so custom and they are very unique. It's quite an exclusive product, and more so, it's an exclusive experience. Purchasing a Morgan and owning a Morgan. So they seem to be going down very well, and we've just done a very custom 50 off car called the Midsummer, and about 9 of those cars found their way into hands in the Middle East.
Wow. Well, I'll be looking out for those on the road. I mean, what do you think it is about a Morgan that makes it so appealing to this particular market here in the Middle East?
So the market in the Middle East, what we see is people really like and really cherish bespoke quality items, real luxury items, and really a luxury experience to go along with that. So when you buy a Morgan, it's very much like buying a fine tailored suit. So everything is selected and chosen for your particular taste and your palate. And that seems to be resonating really well with the Middle Eastern market.
And you've got a new range out, the Super Sport. Just tell us a little bit about that.
So that's the car that you can see behind me today. So this is a car that has been launched today in Malvern. It's a car that we think will help grow our audience across the globe. So it's a car that's more dynamic, so it's more dynamically capable than any car that's gone before it from Morgan, but equally, it's a more usable car. So it'll be useful in the middle of a hot summer in the Middle East, but also it can navigate a very cold and wet winter in the UK.
You haven't mentioned the E word yet, electric vehicles. You've got a prototype, I gather, that you're working on. I mean, do you think that's the face of things to come for Morgan?
So eventually, our customers are telling us that they still want to buy internal combustion engine cars. So as long as we're allowed to do that, we will still do it. We do intend to bring electric vehicles into the model lineup, but they're still a little way off. At the moment, we're concentrating on developing the technology to enable us to do it the right way. And for us, our cars are incredibly lightweight. They're really high performance. So it's making sure that the technology we utilize speaks to those messages and speaks to that core DNA.
Yeah, because I mean, you've got to adapt to the changing times. I mean, obviously, sustainability is one of the main buzzwords out there. I mean, that's a really hard challenge for the auto industry if you don't go down the electric vehicle route. I mean, how do you think you're going to navigate these rather complicated times?
So building electric vehicles is one part of the story, and we've got a really talented engineering team with a lot of experience, working with other manufacturers for developing that kind of technology. But we look at the sustainability piece much more broadly. And if you take into account the way we manufacture our cars, which is inherently sustainable, so there's no big tools, there's not a huge amount of power consumption in our factory. We joke that the factory is powered by Weetabix because everybody, it's the guys on the tools making things by hand. That's how we build our cars. Equally, the materials that we use in the car are inherently sustainable. So we use more recycled content in the aluminium that we use than any other car manufacturer. The wood that we source for our wooden bodies is sourced sustainably in our own forest. So we have an inherently sustainable kind of backdrop for the company, and I think that's a key part of the story going forward. Yeah, it doesn't sound like there's too much plastic on a Morgan. So lots of leather, aluminium.
Exactly, sounds like that. There can be such a thing, though, to answer my question, as a handcrafted classic Morgan that just happens to be electric. But does it lose a bit of its DNA by being electric, do you think?
I don't think so. So when we look at the DNA, core principles for Morgan are lightweight, it's the craftsmanship, it's the coach building, the way we build our cars, it's the types of materials that we use, it's all the touch points, these exquisite touch points for the customer. So very rarely is the powertrain at the center of that. And so for us, we believe we can keep our DNA alive and we can keep the core principles of Morgan manufacturing going forward. And one day that will just mean that they're powered with an electric powertrain. But I think we know the direction that we're going in, and we're getting ourselves well prepared for that.
I mean, some people have taken matters into their own hands. I was just looking online and I saw a couple of resto mods bearing the Morgan brand. These are, of course, for the benefit of our viewers, cars that have had the combustion engine removed and an electric engine inserted. There are a couple of them out there. What do you think of them?
I think if it means people are getting out and enjoying their Morgans on the road, then I fully support it. I think for us, it's not about what powers the car. It's about how much enjoyment you get from using it, and that's really what we're about. We've got this ethos in the company of driving joy. Not only is that enjoying the drive, but it's also driving the joy and having a joyful experience of ownership of the car. So that's key for us. So yeah, I'm happy that they're doing that.
Okay, I mean, we were just talking about the sort of the general phasing out of combustion engines. Some countries obviously moving ahead on that faster than others. What role do governments play, do you think? And what do you think of the role played by governments in dictating what's on the road and what isn't on the road?
Well, they clearly dictate the narrative. I think, as an engineer myself from an engineering background, I think you can allow engineers to solve these types of problems. And, we've got a great set of engineers at Morgan that are capable of solving these types of problems. So I think it's imperative that the government, whilst they must take a lead, they allow the solutions to come from industry.
And in terms of raising the profile of Morgan, obviously, you're not in the business of mass production, but making the brand more visible in new markets like the Middle East that you mentioned. I wondered if you might be thinking of trying out some more radical marketing tactics. And I was just looking at Jaguar that's unveiled the Type 00 or Type 00, I'm not sure which it is, generating lots of discussion and debate, and it's clearly working. Is that the sort of thing Morgan might do?
I'm not sure that really sits with the way we generally do business. I think we've been really pleased that the way, the team have done a great job here today with our live launch. We want to send out the message that Morgans are the most exquisite, the most hand-built sports cars. And I think word of mouth will carry so far, and the rest of the team here will do the remainder. So I think that's the message from us. And we follow the beat of our own drum here.
All right, so you've been making cars since 1909. 4 generations of Morgan family members have been involved. Just sort of sum up for us what the enduring appeal of a Morgan is, in your opinion.
Well, Morgan is the only place in the world that you can come and see your car handcrafted the way it is. There's a huge amount of passion that goes right the way through the production line, right the way through kind of the engineering and all the stuff. We invite customers to come and visit their cars in production. There's a sense of family and community that you just will not find anywhere else in the world. And I think that's some of the most endearing characteristics. And we make such beautiful cars. So, yeah, we've been in business for 116 years, and hopefully the next 116 years will be equally as exciting.
Yeah, so what is your vision, just lastly, for Morgan for the next 5 to 10 years?
So you'll see more cars that are like the Super Sport behind us. We'll definitely be pushing forward with other internal combustion engine models eventually. And, you know, in the 10-year horizon, you'll definitely see your first electric Morgan.
Just lastly, I wonder if you could just step to one side so we can see that lovely car just behind you, because we can't see an awful lot of it. Let's bring it up full screen. Just tell us what we're looking at here, Matthew.
So you are looking at the Super Sport. So this is one of the cars that we've used on the launch today. So it is a 3-litre turbocharged engine, 0 to 60, 3.9 seconds. And all those body panels that you're looking at, so all those beautiful painted panels are handcrafted, every single one of them made by hand in our factory in Worcestershire.
Well, that is a stunning piece of engineering, it has to be said. Thank you so much. We're going to leave it there. Just want to say a very big thank you to you. Matthew Hall, CEO of the Morgan Motor Company. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on today's edition of Global News Today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.